Jack Evans was born on March 14, 1930. He grew up in a town called Westchester. His father was a Lutheran minister. Due to the start of the Depression, Jack Evans' father decided to change his career and join the United States Army as a chaplain in 1934. Mr. Evans was an Army brat his entire childhood, which made it easy for him to be able to join the Army later in his career. Jack Evans didn't stay at one single school. In fact, his senior year was spent in 3 different schools, all located in Germany. Both Jack and his brothers attended a military college across from South Carolina. They both graduated and were commissioned into the United States Army on the same day in June of 1952. Mr. Evans was very happy with being commissioned into the United States Army. He had first thought about applying to the Coast Guard Academy, but then decided to go with the military. Both he and his brother were very pleased with the decision of making the Army their career. Since Mr. Evans was commissioned into the Army, he didn't have the basic training that you would get if you were enlisted or drafted into the Army, but his basic training started when he was around age 4. As I said earlier, his father went into the Army in 1934, so his family moved around with the Army. This was when World War II started and his father fought in the war. He was in the 2nd Infantry Division at the time. Jack and his family lived in Indiana, so his training actually started when he was about 4 years old. Jack Evans' first assignment after officially joining the Army was when he was assigned to Fort Bliss, Texas, to the Gull Missile School. His basic training was in artillery. Mr. Evans then served in the Korean War in 1953. Towards the end of the Korean War, he decided to get married to who is now his wife, Paula. But before he went to the Korean War, he met her and they talked about getting married after he got home from Korea. So when he got home, he was assigned temporarily to go to a school at Texas, and fortunately, that is where his wife Paula lived, and stayed while he served in Korea. In December of that year, Jack's father drove from the East Coast to Texas to marry them. Shortly after Paula and Mr. Evans were married, Mr. Evans returned to war. This time he was serving in the Vietnam War. When Jack Evans went into the war, they weren't sure where to put him at first, but then they decided to put him in a special forces group that we do not know the name because he was sworn to secrecy. But it was a brand new group consisting of 35 men. They all went to the ambassador of Cambodia and worked in his direction. Jack and his group of 35 other men would go into Cambodia very periodically in their uniforms and do whatever that the ambassador needed for them to do. Some of the trips that he had to go on were very long. Some even took up to 7 days. But when they came back to Saigon. Saigon was the place where most soldiers received their mail. That was also where they were quartered their assignments. But the group of 35 men that he was in received many different kinds of missions. Mr. Evans also was very interested in what they were doing.
I liked doing what I was doing, and because it was we would execute the plans. The higher level staffs would do the planning, and then they would tell us what to do based on what their planning was. And so I like that a lot more. It's like being the coach of a football team or on the team on the field. And so it's a very, very good example of the difference, because you had to be very, very flexible if you were in the combat role as opposed to a staff planning role. But they're both very, very important. You couldn't get along without either one, obviously. But I enjoyed it because it was, well, let's just say, a never dull moment.
Jack Evans received a lot of medals during his services. One of the medals that he achieved was the Legion of Merit, which he received 2 times. The Legion of Merit is an award given to a military armed force by the President. Being awarded the Legion of Merit signifies that you display meritorious conduct. He also received the Army Commendation Medal. The Army Commendation Medal is a medal that is given to armed forces of the United States. This medal is given to people with the personality of heroism, meritorious achievement, and meritorious service. The Defense Service Meritorious Medal is a special award given to a person that was in the military that went through many joint activities. This medal is given to someone for non-combat meritorious achievement. A veteran is given this award if they act in this manner all the time. Jack Evans and his group also went to Washington, D.C. to help. There they met one of the advisors named Alexander Haig. Alexander worked for Richard Nixon, but even to this day, that group of people still can't say exactly what they did. While Mr. Evans was in Vietnam, he met a friend named Ronnie. Ronnie was in the Special Forces with Mr. Evans. He had a lot of basic training, but he was very strong in a language capability. Mr. Evans' friend Ronnie was a Army Lieutenant Colonel. Ronnie was raised in the Philippines and grew up in Hawaii. He was very good at speaking the energetic language of the tribal people who lived up in the mountains in Vietnam. Being able to speak their language, he could bring back a lot of information. Towards the end of the war, Ronnie and Mr. Evans were able to go home. The night before they could go home, Ronnie came to Mr. Evans and told him that there was a CIA aircraft going up to the mountain regions where all of the tribal people were that he had developed relationships with. The CIA told Ronnie that he had a seat for him, and he would fly up to the mountain regions that afternoon, and they would come back tomorrow. He said that he would have plenty of time to reach the aircraft and fly back home to the United States. At first, Mr. Evans thought it was a bad idea, but he changed his mind and told him to go. The next day, Mr. Evans found out that Ronnie had died that night, up in the mountains. The only thing that he got back was his personal items to send back.
I had a very good friend who I did not know before he was assigned to me in Vietnam. He had an unusual. He was Special Forces, had a lot of experience in Special Forces, but he also had a lot of language capability. He was a Army Lieutenant Colonel, but he was raised in the Philippines and grew up in Hawaii. And he was very able to speak the Asiatic type languages, and he learned how to speak the language of the tribal people in Vietnam that lived up in the mountains. So he did, most of his assignments were with them because they trusted him and they knew him, and he could bring back a lot of good information and get things accomplished that we had to get accomplished. Couldn't do it any other way than being able to speak their language. So he could do that. The thing that makes me remember him so much is his time was up in Vietnam, and he was due to come home. The day before he was to come home, he came to me in the office and said, "Look, there's a CIA aircraft going up into the mountain region, and they said I could have a seat. I would go up there this afternoon, and they're coming back tomorrow, and I'll fly back tomorrow, and plenty of time to meet my aircraft to fly back to the United States." And I said, Ronnie, I don't know. I'm just uneasy about that. But Ronnie's very convincing. So he talked me into it. I said, "Well, go ahead, Ronnie. You deserve it. You've done so much work here." So he did. He got killed that night up in the mountains, and I'll never forget that conversation we had just before he left. And the only thing I got back was the body came back. Of course, that was the grave registration, but I had to take all his personal effects and send it back to the family. So that was one tough. Well, it was almost a week we went through that particular situation, but it's something you never forget.
Mr. Evans returned home safely the next day. They dedicated the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. at the National Cathedral. They read all 54,000 names of the soldiers that gave their lives for us to be free. They had soldiers volunteer to read off the names. They may have been close to them, or they may not even know them. They just had to read them. Mr. Evans read Ronnie's name along with many other names of people he knew that were killed. But we are lucky to have Mr. Jack Evans today to tell us about his service.